Today's sermon is titled Face the Music and Dance, to be delivered by Michael Eselun. Michael Eselun serves as the chaplain for the Sims-Mann UCLA Center for Integrative Oncology. Two-time TEDx speaker, Michael speaks extensively to healthcare professionals, patient populations, and faith communities across the country. He's also worked as an activist educator addressing anti-LGBTQ bias in the larger community for over 30 years. Michael was recently inducted into the UCLA Semel Institute Eudaimonian Society in recognition of having lived a meaning-driven life. He has 4 volumes of CDs available for purchase. Contact Michael through his website, which is www.michaeleselun.com. Michael.
Good morning. There is so much wisdom out there, particularly within the Eastern traditions, that would encourage us to pursue acceptance, equanimity, as a pathway to inner peace, maybe even to enlightenment. In fact, there's a Zen maxim that would say that the great way is easy for one with no preferences. Simple, right? But as an oncology chaplain, I walk beside those for whom a cancer diagnosis becomes automatic entry into the veritable Olympics of acceptance. And Zen master be damned, I would say that everyone I have ever walked beside most certainly had their preferences, and they would have preferred anything other than this. Stage 4 cancer, really? I'm supposed to accept this? I can't accept that it happened to me, that it happened to my family. I want my old life back. Even though our resistance to accepting what is, no matter the circumstances, only solidifies and deepens our suffering, leaving us stranded miles away from any oasis we might call inner peace. At the same time, we live in a culture that absolutely reveres self-reliance and abhors what it perceives as self-pity. That part of us that is revulsed by what we would call self-pity often robs us, I find, of an authentic experience of self-compassion. We can't feel that feeling in the moment. Daryl is newly diagnosed with a particularly rare and aggressive sarcoma, but he's also completely asymptomatic. He looks and feels just fine. So, Michael, I guess I just live my life normally, right? Still, he's read enough and heard enough from his oncologist to have a sense of what's coming down the pike. So there is, of course, attendant fear. But, Michael, I don't dare feel those feelings. If I do, I'll go down a dark hole and I'll never come out. It's a pretty commonly held perception that if I feel my feelings, that somehow they will swallow me up. And yet I find just the opposite to be true, that when we give our feelings some sunlight, let them flow through us, they can lose their power over us. They loosen their grip from around our necks. Vicky was, I was referred to her by an oncologist a few years ago. She was living for 15 years with a particularly rare lymphoma. And Vicky was so distressed that the oncologist thought that she might even need a psychiatric evaluation. But in any event, Michael, she's up in the infusion clinic now and she's sobbing heavily. Will you please go see her? As I say, she had been living with lymphoma for 15 years, and in those 15 years had been on maybe a dozen different drug protocols. And each one worked for a time and then would lose its effectiveness. And today was day 1 of yet another drug protocol. And Vicky was absolutely cooked, fried. But to hear her tell it, Michael, really, I'm so blessed. Look, at least my cancer is treatable and I have a wonderful oncologist. I do. And I have great insurance and I have a wonderful husband and kids and grandkids. I have a deep Christian faith and a wonderful church community. Really, I'm such a blessed woman. It was like the longer she talked, the less oxygen there was in the room, as if the rope were getting tighter around her neck because she just couldn't reconcile these all too human feelings of weariness, frustration, resentment, despair, with her attachment to her identity as Little Miss Sunshine. What's more, her fierce attachment to a belief in positivity. I mean, look around here, Michael. So many others have it so much worse. Why am I such a crybaby? There was no room for self-compassion. There was no room for grace, for allowance to be a human being. It was as if she were trying to compose a symphony called Vicky, but had decided that only these 4 or 5 notes would be acceptable to be used. Only these sweet high notes of acceptance and gratitude and forgiveness and joy and love. There was no deep room for deep, dark notes of despair and frustration and resentment. The thing is, it takes all 88 keys on a piano to write a full-bodied symphony. It takes all those sweet high notes, all those deep, dark, low notes, and everything in between. A few dark notes in the symphony of Vicky does not make her less of who she is. It does not erase her essential sunshiny spirit. It makes her more. The way I see it, this is a kind of dance between acceptance and self-compassion. The two go hand in hand. While we often have these lofty aspirations for acceptance and equanimity, we're also encumbered by all too human feelings of despair and frustration and grief. How do we have acceptance for those? I see this as a kind of dance. I'm reminded of a toy that I had as a child, a little gizmo with a trigger on it. And as you pulled the trigger, a card spun around very fast. Now, on one side of the card might be the image of a bird cage. On the other side was the image of a bird. And as you spun the card around very fast, it looked as if the bird was in the cage. Now, each side of the card was telling its own story. It was true. This is a bird cage. This is a bird. But we don't get the complete picture without the dance, without the constant movement. What if it's like that with our own self-compassion and our desire for acceptance? A few years ago, Kelly used to attend my weekly spiritual reflection group. She's in her 40s, ovarian cancer. She would often share, Michael, everybody tells me I have to accept this, and I don't. I hate that word, acceptance. To me, acceptance implies that I approve, and I don't approve. I acknowledge that I have cancer, but I don't accept it. I got an exercise in acceptance myself a few years ago. In March of 2017, I took the most magnificent solo trip to Nepal and Bhutan. The second to the last day of my trip was probably one of the most splendid days of my life. Along with my beloved guide and friend Sai Wang, we climbed up a mountain to visit Tiger Nest Monastery, a magnificent 17th century Buddhist monastery, perilously hanging off the side of a mountain with this magnificent view of the Paro Valley. The only way to reach the temple is to climb. And it's a site of sacred pilgrimage for Bhutanese people. All are expected to make that pilgrimage at some point in their lives, if they can. After making that arduous climb, which is not unlike climbing to the top of Yosemite Falls, Sai Wang and I arrived, and when we entered the first chamber, I was most struck by this gorgeous orange tabby cat snoozing in the one shaft of sunlight coming in through a teeny little window right next to the monk who was tending to the shrine. Sai Wang and I sat down next to one another and we meditated for a time. And then we lit some butter lamp candles. I lit them with prayers for my mom and prayers for so many of my beloved patients. With our spirits full to the brim, we descended back down the mountain. And then I was treated to the most luscious herbal hot stone bath in a wooden tub at the family farm of my driver, Sonam Tabgai. And after this delirious soak, I got to enjoy dinner with him and his family and with Sai Wang. Like I say, it was a perfect day. The next day, I was to be taken to the airport and fly from Paro to Kathmandu, spend the night, and then catch my long flight home to Los Angeles. When I got up, I pulled back the drape and I was stunned to see the whole landscape blanketed in snow. It was so magnificent, so quiet, so soft, so beautiful. Oh my God, Michael, just think if this had happened yesterday, you wouldn't have been able to have that climb. Isn't it wonderful? But then it didn't stop snowing. Uh-oh. What if my flight is canceled? What if I don't make it? I got packed quickly, went downstairs. Saiwang picked me up. Saiwang, do you think you can call the airport? Is my flight going to leave? No, Michael, you cannot call the airport. You must go in person. And I'm sorry to say that I'm not allowed to go in the terminal with you, that you must go in alone. So it will be goodbye when I drop you off. Now a little panic is starting to set in. Uh-oh, if I miss my flight and they have to book me on another flight, those Airbus 380s have 10 seats across in coach. I know they'll stick me in a middle seat. I won't make it for 30 hours. I'll kill somebody. Wait, Michael, just breathe one moment at a time. I wasn't expecting this pop quiz in Buddhist philosophy at this point in my journey. Just breathe, Michael. Notice what's around you. Oh, look at those sweet kids playing in the snow. They're so happy to be let go from school early today. We get to the airport and have a rather tearful goodbye with Saiwang, which doesn't exactly feel like goodbye because I'm not really sure I'm going. He says he'll wait in the parking lot for an hour or so to make sure that I'm all set. When I get inside the terminal, it's pretty clear there's no electric power there. There are no lights on, there's no PA system, there's no computer boards. There's one woman behind a desk and hundreds of frantic passengers. Now, I have to say, that Bhutan is the most Buddhist country imaginable. It's not just a religion, it's not just a way of life. Somehow it's in their DNA, this capacity for equanimity and acceptance. When I finally make my way up to the desk and plead my case and tell her my itinerary, she says, "Yes, sir, how may I help you?" As if she has all the time in the world, as if she hasn't just been dealing with hundreds of disgruntled passengers. I explain my itinerary, and she says that if the flight is canceled, the airline will have to put me up in another hotel for the night in Paro. And there's a slim chance I might get on a flight tomorrow morning and still make my connecting flight in Kathmandu home to Los Angeles. But for now, hold tight. Oh, well, the flight was, of course, canceled. And thank goodness Saiwang was out there still, and he could drive me to the hotel so I didn't have to wrestle with shuttle buses and all that. When I got to the hotel, it became clear that that blackout was all over Paro. There was no electric power, no hot water, no light, no internet, no heat. It was so cold. I put on every article of clothing I had and got under the covers just to keep my teeth from chattering. This little exercise in Buddhist philosophy was going on way too long and it was way too hard. I'm trying to wrestle with all the what ifs and put them aside. There's nothing you can do about it, Michael. As it's growing dark, I realize there's no way to see in the room. There's a candle, but no match. So in the dark, I fumble around, make my way down to the lobby. And just as I do, in walks a man appears to be from the airport. I nab him before anybody else can. Say, "Excuse me, sir, are you from the airport? Can you tell me, will my flight be leaving tomorrow morning?" "Well, yes, sir, of course. But first, tell me, how do you like the hotel?" "How do you like the hotel?" My inner ugly American is starting to wake up. "Well, it's very nice, but it's cold and there's no heat and there's no hot water and I can't take a shower. I can't get warm and there's no electricity. I can't contact my spouse. What am I supposed to do? I'm scared." And all he says is, "Yes, sir, all over Palo, there's no heat. There's no hot water." It was so stunning, this striking example of equanimity and acceptance, but with tenderness and kindness. It was so striking that I thought of calling this talk, "How do you like the hotel?" It was a quality to which I feel like I can only aspire. I just don't think I have the wiring for that, but I can try. My little Italian grandma, my mom's mom, was a born worrier. She worried about everything and everybody her whole life. Toward the end of her life, she had had a number of health problems, a couple of hospitalizations. I went to see her after one surgery or another. They wouldn't let me in the recovery room, but I could talk to her over the threshold. And I said, "How you doing in there, Graham?" And she said, "Honey, you get yourself all worked up over these things, and it's just never as bad as you think it's going to be." A whole lifetime had to be lived to reach that wisdom. A few years later, I got to have another exercise in self-compassion this time. It was January 3rd, 2020, my first day back to work after the holidays. I was in the infusion clinic in Santa Monica, driving home eastward on Santa Monica Boulevard. As I'm crossing Barrington, a woman runs a red light and smashes into the driver's side door of my 14-year-old Prius with me on the other side of it. A car from which I was hoping to squeeze a few more years, so much so that I had just put $4,000 into it for a replacement hybrid battery and new tires, a total loss. Happy New Year. So I had to replace my car. I laid out the money for a slightly newer used Prius, and I was happy to have it. Not even a year later, 10 months into the pandemic, it's Christmas Eve. Scott and I are home alone, as everyone was. This is before anyone was vaccinated. I hear what sounds like an explosion out in front of the house. The whole house shook. I couldn't imagine, but I had this sinking fear in my gut. I ran outside. All the neighbors were already out. Some kid running a drug deal gone bad had smashed into my new car with such velocity that he knocked it 20 feet in front of our neighbor's house. I went out of my mind. No, I could not accept this. My beloved friend and neighbor, Taylor, was so great. He holds the space of calm. He comes out. He does all the things you're supposed to do, takes the pictures, gets the license number, gets the insurance information, deals with the cops while I'm just having a meltdown. He keeps saying, it's okay, Michael. It's okay, Michael. It's okay. Quit saying that, Taylor. There's absolutely nothing about this that's okay. God bless Lisa from across the street. She came up beside me and said into my ear, Michael, you're absolutely right. Nothing about this is okay. Sometimes you just need your feelings affirmed, you know? Aside from having little capacity to accept this situation, I have such little capacity for what I perceive as injustice, particularly spiritual injustice. I mean, look at what I do for a living. Is it too much to ask that after having my car totaled and being injured and laying out thousands of dollars for a replacement car, that I could keep that car nice for longer than 10 months? Apparently, yes. And everyone I told about my loss responded, as you might assume, except Scott. Well, Michael, just be glad you weren't in the car. It's just a car. It's only material things. It's just money. And the more I heard it, the more I wanted to kill people. And the more I judged myself because I knew they were right, but I couldn't come close to that feeling at all. This was so much deeper than about the car. In fact, it took me a good week rather, to come up with a word for how I felt. Forsaken. I felt forsaken, spiritually abandoned. And because it was holiday time, the insurance company took over a week to come tow the car away. So every time I left the house to get the paper, walk to the store, get the mail, I'm confronted by this wreckage in front of me, by this loss, by the spiritual injustice, by the violence of it. And when they finally did come to tow the car away, I shocked myself. I just sobbed as if they were wheeling my dead mother out of the room. And I'm not a car person. I didn't understand it. I went inside the house and just cried. Scott just held me. I was embarrassed. I said, Scott, you know, this isn't about the car, right? He said, I know. I'm a swimmer. I swim every day religiously. And during the pandemic, it presented quite a challenge to maintain my swimming regimen. I was schlepping all over town to community pools that might be open for a time. I was driving out to Glendale because their community pool was open, observing strict precautions. Every day I had to scramble to get a reservation to swim for a measly 45 minutes. I'm driving home from the pool. I'm so thoroughly disgusted with myself for being unable to let go of this and get past it. I'm having a good talk with myself. I'm driving down Forest Lawn Drive past two enormous cemeteries, Mount Sinai and Forest Lawn. I'm saying, look, Michael, there's hundreds of thousands of dead people up there. They'd give anything to be back in a body and be wrestling with something as stupid as your car. Doesn't that put this into perspective? No. And in that moment, a light bulb went on. Wow. If that comparison doesn't unlodge my stuckness, then maybe I have to honor the depth of this wound, to stand in awe of it. And maybe what's required is self-compassion, without judgment, without the need to compare. And with that awakening, I found something shift, and I could inch a little bit more closely towards something we might call acceptance. It can be hard to allow ourselves to feel really deep, dark, uncomfortable feelings, betrayal, anger, resentment, grief, sorrow, particularly when we want so desperately to be strong and to move on, particularly when our feelings are not congruent with our cultural expectations and values. But the feelings are not going away. So I do believe the pathway through is through that doorway of self-compassion, and to dance with it. Not just to dance with this circumstance, but to dance with all the attendant feelings. I love old songs. I've come to love them more the older I get. Old songs that I might have called corny once upon a time. I'm moved by the deceptively simple lyrics and how much meaning is in them. Songs by the Gershwins, Rodgers and Hart, Jerome Kern. Irving Berlin was one such a songwriter. Let's face the music and dance before the fiddlers have fled, before they ask us to pay the bill, and while we still have a chance. Let's face the music and dance. So what if I've been diagnosed with terminal cancer or some other tragedy has befallen me? Maybe it's incumbent upon me to face the music, to accept it, yes, if you will. But before the music is over, to dance with it, to dance with all of it, with the circumstances, with all the feelings, with the grief, the sorrow, the despair, but also the hope and the love that might be there after everything else has been burned away. Maybe that's the pathway, because soon we'll be without the moon, humming a different tune. And then there may be teardrops to shed, but while there's moonlight and music and love and romance, let's face the music and dance. So be it.